I just wanted to come on live because what does parent rights really mean? Legally for schools anyways. This issue is broad. And the issue of parent rights is among the most heated in public education, invoked by political campaigns and debates over debating everything from COVID policy to currently curriculum choices and classroom discussions about race, gender, and sexuality. Most recently, the Communist Democrat Party in Colorado has been a potent rallying cry for progressive activism. And politicians, including Meg Froelich, have been expanding the government's power to raise and train our children, all in the name of abuse and neglect. But the concept of parental rights has a history in Lockean philosophy and Christian theology over what it actually means, especially in education. Politicians who invoke the words "I'm for teachers and students" have different things in mind and different aspirations and many general expressions. When I see politicians invoking the "I'm for teachers and students" and the teachers union, it's been connected to a general idea that the government is overstepping its bounds and making decisions for children they are supposed to be educating academically. Currently, Meg Froelich is trying to take away the parental rights of parents and pushing kids to fight back against their parents. Parental rights have to do with parental power. The natural and fundamental right binds parents equally, and we see it in positive law of God everywhere. Without distinction, when it commands the obedience of children, Exodus 12, honor thy father and thy mother. So we see that the state is trying to push kids against their parents and usurp their authority with laws of mental health and education. So John Locke was a classical philosopher and the author of several essays on human understanding. He writes on parental rights, and he says, had but this one thing been well considered without looking any deeper into the matter about this power of parents, which bears the name of absolute dominion and regal authority, when under the title of parental power, it seems appropriate that the fundamental authority from whence they would derive of persons jointly. What does that mean? He's in his book. Let me see if I can find it. He advances the argument about parents today, reflecting a long-standing, deep-seated fear that our system of public education indoctrinates children to be militant activists for Marxism. He advances the argument that it is within the realm of parents to teach and educate their children in the way they should go and to be good citizens. That's the bottom line. That public schools are devoid of teaching children to read properly and proficiently so they can make full sense of their reasoning skills. And also alienates children from their families and their culture, thereby undermining parental authority. So the 20th century, we've seen that children were educated in the faith. Before the 20th century, children were exclusively educated in the faith at home, and they were exclusively educated to read at home. It was very important that mothers pass on the faith, and there was no separate instruction for children. Parents were duty-bound and ordained by God to educate their children. Our education system today is failing our kids because the government is overstepping its bound and into a breach and providing early childhood education through high school. And what they're doing is they're trying to indoctrinate our kids and put our kids in place and make sure that these kids do not have the ability to think outside the box. So what they're doing in our schools is they are stunting their creativity and their growth and putting them in their place, making sure that these kids are walking little robots doing what they're told. So it's easier to control kids when they are mass schooled than to control them when they're each in their homes learning from their parents. Not only that, but the government does get $16,000 from the federal government. The states get $16,000 from the government. So that's another way that the states get funded, and another way that the federal government usurps state power. So today, schools have pushed parents out of their duty to raise and train their children. In order to see where we went wrong in education, you need to understand where we went wrong. Two changes in the state education you must know of is that at birth, an infant cannot choose for himself. The children is under the authority of his parents, and in 1450, the printing press was invented. The result of the printing press made books more accessible and affordable for people. Today, the internet makes everything readily available for people. Because of the printing press, America and Europe rode the explosion in books and literacy that Catholics had created. The invention of cheap books changed education tremendously. It made literacy an affordable hobby. It also made it possible to create schools that could teach the masses. We thank Martin Luther for this, for it was he who saw the possibility of using schools to interpose himself between child and parent. And Luther opened the door for the German princes who were competing with the Pope over secular authority. Luther was the first Christian to ever advocate for compulsory education. Today, America is essentially an illiterate culture. While some Americans might receive some formal education in the schools, book ownership is scarce. Literacy skills are often little used as the school teacher comes to rely on memorized curricula from the Board of Education. Teachers are often seen as a job, a vocation, not much different from being a worker in a factory. Because Henry VIII, many Catholics experienced anti-Catholic bigotry in the hearts of most colonists. The British did not love Catholics. In 75 years before the American Revolution, the British colonies mimicked the laws of England, so it was not uncommon for Catholics to suffer double taxation or to be deprived of the right to vote or hold office. In 1756, the colonies had 7,000 Catholics. 30 years later, Catholics still made up 1% of the population in the 13 colonies. The French and the Indian War during the years was mostly viewed as a religious war, pitting Protestant British colonists against the French Indian Catholics. Anti-Catholic fervor in America during the war was high, and was only slightly moderated by Protestant victory in 1763. While American Protestants needed to enlist French Catholics to help to fight the war for independence, the main anti-Catholic sentiment wasn't altered. The left wants to talk about slavery as if it is purely a black thing. However, the American population was over 95% Protestant. Almost every Catholic was poor, and about an eighth of them were slaves and Indians. In many states, it had been illegal for Catholics to practice in politics. The separation of church and state was a fact of life for Catholics. Catholic faith was separated from the state because the state was thoroughly Protestant and would not permit Catholics to participate politically. While the church had always taught the importance of making the faith part of public culture, there was in America not enough Catholic presence numerically, financially, or politically to accomplish what the church required. Bishop John England addressed the 1826 Congress. There is a plain distinction between spiritual authority and right to interfere in the regulations of the government. If Congress attempted to pass a law prohibiting Catholic faith, I would not obey it because it would not be a law. For you have no power in such case. You, Congress, have no such power to interfere with my religious rights. The tribunal of the church has no power to interfere with my civil rights. And actually, the church can interfere with their civil rights. What he meant was that the church has every right to forbid the faithful to cast votes for Hitler. For a Hitler. A Stalinist, a Pol Pot, or any other politician, political movement, or law that opposes God or his teaching. The state must make sure every citizen has the ability to exercise the rights given to him by God. The state must recognize the divine image in man. If the state fails to maintain or promote such a government, the church is within the right indeed to inform the state of its errors and help the state correct its errors. The church cannot be separated from the state. The Christ did insist on rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's, but that's Mark 12:17. But you must understand this in the context. Christ in no way implied the equality of the sacred and the secular. He was being tested regarding the morality of paying taxes to the Romans. So Jesus answered, giving God, what is God, refers to man's creation in the image and likeness of God. 1:26-27. While one pays taxes to the state, one's very life is owed to God. Caesar himself is bound by this responsibility. That means that politicians are bound by the responsibility to give God what is God's. Christ means this: any state that attempts to make itself the supreme authority on earth is in error. And right now, Colorado legislators are attempting to make themselves the supreme authority in Colorado. She is subject to divine law. She guards and hands down. She has the sole duty to instruct politicians on the state in their proper duties. She has the obligation to instruct the faithful so that they can see to it that politicians of the state carry out their proper duties. the church is she. The nation and the world will suffer if the Catholics don't involve themselves in establishing the true understanding of human law. It is a hearsay to believe that the idea that the power of the state can be separated from that of the church. If the state is separated from the truth, the church guards, and the promulgators, then every manner of the state assault upon the human person is permissible. Today we see this in the state assault upon the unborn person with abortion laws, and eugenics is also being seen with young people in assisted suicides. Another example of the state assault from parent rights to raise and train their children with school regulations that usurp the parent authority. The purpose of mass schooling in 1820? Before 1820, children were treated like adults because they spent most of their adult life working alongside their parents. George Washington started school at 11 years old. Although judged as an ordinary intellect by everyone, was literate and well-read as today's college graduates. There was no such thing as an adolescent back in the colonial days because by the age of 12, most young men had entered manhood. Most, not all. Most men were apprentices at this age. When the agrarian society began to move towards industrialization, the agrarian model tried to follow, but it proved hard to do because factory work was more dangerous. Consequently, factory work required a caste system. The farmers detested the caste system. They had to be broken in order to open up a new culture. The new culture broke up the family. The new mass school system made youth useless. Darwin eugenics required not just control of the intellect, it required control of man and population control. The masses had to be stripped of their individuality, taught to follow orders, made needy. Men had to be emasculated. The unfit, that's where you see trans. The unfit couldn't be allowed to breed, and reproduction was a privilege that should be permitted only for the highest classes. Hence you see today the Darwin theory of emasculating of our men to be transgendered and forcing abortions on blacks, Hispanics, and poor women. Selective breeding before the masses takes things into their own hands. Edward Thorndike said intended schools to establish this condition. So our schools today emasculate our men. They teach the kids to just follow orders, to be needy, and it strips them of their individuality. Government schooling is the perfect organization of the hive, and standardized testing as a necessary means of identifying and labeling the genetically unfit. See, Hispanics and blacks are genetically unfit, and so therefore the testings that they take in order for us to go to college label us as genetically unfit, and only those blacks and Hispanics that fit the hive are allowed to go to college. Emphasizing the idea that parents may not dictate the curricular choices of public schools that expose children to ideas which the parents may disapprove. So there you have it. By the end of the 20th century, increasing the duration and intensity of schooling caused a sharp decline in fertility. This was desirable for the elite. It kept the uneducated uninformed and unqualified masses from reproducing. The first forced sterilization laws were passed in Indiana in 1907 in order to prevent those unfit to breed from having children. Today we are passing gender-affirming care and codifying abortion and taking away parental rights through abuse and neglect cases to keep control of those unfit from reproducing. As if these Marxists couldn't do any more harm, they continue the destruction of the family so that the dependence of the state is total and complete. Today, most people work for someone else, earning a regular paycheck and having steady jobs. Now we have universal preschool so that people can work more and less on raising a family. What are we seeing today is that in the early 20th century, thinkers wanted social control, that humans are all lumps of cookie dough. He approved of replacing the community, the family, the church with propaganda on education and mass media and shaking the state loose from the church. If back then parents could see that the schools weren't accomplishing the superlative education claimed today, parents are waking up and fed up with a subpar education provided by the government schools. In 1852, Massachusetts was the first to pass a compulsory education law, and 80% of parents revolted against those laws. While it took 30 years back then to subdue the population and force children into schools, it took 100 years to subdue the population and indoctrinate our children. Today, we see a national revolt from public education. Although we are in 2023, the same tactics are being used as parents rise up in opposition to the results coming out of government schools. The elites keep reinventing and recreating new fall guys. Politicians are mandating gun control to force an end to our Second Amendment rights. They require social workers to assess mental health illness, the invention of gender-affirming care and abortion care to control population, and revising our history to keep people ignorant. Teachers used to work for parents, and parents paid very, very well. The 20th century transformed teachers and replaced their parents with the government. Today, the transformation is complete. They are extending time to preschool age so that you can work and focus on having material goods instead of books. They're forcing the parents to go back to work. Compulsory schooling was never about education. It was about applying Darwin eugenics to perfect the social situation. We see this in AI, in vitro fertility centers, in school. So schooling has several goals. It was meant to sever the ties between family members, and it still is, and Meg Froelich is at the forefront of severing and separating those families. Loyalty to family can't be permitted to interfere with loyalty to the corporation, to the government. Sever the ties between individuals and religion like they're doing now. For example, today we have an ever-increasing suicide rate and mental health illness due to the fact that many individuals have no sense of worth not tied to the corporate life. Religion provided a sense of worth that has been destroyed and is being destroyed. Most people aren't religious, and when you bring up God, they take offense and say, keep God out of society. But worse of all is the assault on Catholic ideas, an assault so subtle to the modern mind that we don't even realize its impact. The assault of personhood itself. This is the key to understanding how society justifies treating men and women and children like cogs in a wheel. The word person is derived from the Greek prosopon. Prosopon means to sound in many directions. This word was Latinized and became persona, and through Christian theology became individual human person. Our founding fathers understood the importance of the definition of person, and that we are made in God's image and likeness. If God is three persons only because of divine relations, we are only person because God calls us into relationship with himself. If we did not do this, if he did not give us the tools of intellect and will necessary for us to respond to his call and enter into divine relationship with him, we would not be human persons. We would be clumps of cells. We would be human animals. Our personhood depends on divine relationship. If we remove the divine relationship, we remove the fact that we are connected with God, and they can unicize us and abort us, even in the old, as we age. For roughly 1,500 years, the meaning of the word person was understood by all in the Western world. English law always begins with no person shall. In other words, no one called into divine relationship with God shall attack that divine relationship using method X, like abortion. If we have a divine relationship with God, abortion cannot stand. Abortion cannot stand. By the 16th and 17th century, people started forming groups and calling them after the Latin term corpus, for corporation. The corporation started exploiting and looking for loopholes in English law. Certainly no person shall do X, but the corporation is not a person, so the corporation can do X with impunity. And you can see why our founding fathers did not trust corporations. This line of reasoning is not valid because corporations are fictitious. They are fake people. They are created by humans, not created by God. They have no divine relationship with God. So if it is in American law, a corporation has no civil rights. Civil rights only belong to human persons. This is an important distinction because today Democrats throw around the word stakeholder. Who are the stakeholders? The stakeholders are the persons who have a divine relationship to God. The stakeholder is the baby in the womb who is trying to develop and live its life and being aborted by a fictitious corporation. Abortion is an assault on human life. You see, if you are a human person in the original religious sense, then you have to be paid a certain amount of respect because God called you. God has found you important enough to call you into relationship with himself. If God, the Creator, finds you important to respect you, then it is important enough for everyone else to treat you with respect as well. This is a basis of civil rights. Our civil rights are based on the idea that God has granted a certain amount of autonomy, a certain set of rights by virtue of your relationship with him. Since a corporation is not called into existence by God, they are not worthy of divine rights. So they have no civil rights. They have no constitutional rights. This is why abortion law in Colorado giving rights to a corporation, the provider, is unconstitutional. This is why the providers need to be subjected to all kinds of legal controls and restrictions, and why Democrats are calling abortion rights reproductive rights for women, but don't define the fetus so as to circumvent the definition of personhood. They have devalued the person. Our founding fathers detested corporations. Today we have nonprofits acting like corporations because of a summary written by law school professor John Chandler Bancroft Davis of the Supreme Court decision 1886, Santa Clara versus Southern Pacific Railroad. Judges and lawyers now act as if corporate persons can now act as divine persons. Davis lied. We need to crush the aristocracy of our moneyed nonprofits and corporations which challenge our government in trials of strength and bid defiance to the laws of our country. Now that personhood is no longer dependent on divine relationship, it was redefined by the state to mean whatever the state determined it to mean. So Meg Frolick's abortion law has redefined the divine relationship of personhood. She is allowing for abortion to take all the way up to birth. It is because of this that schools were stripped of religion, God, and our state officials say God takes no part in government. Today, the state says that the fetus is not a person because personhood has no divine relationship to God. Persons today are collectives. So our rights are our politicians are currently right now listening to collectives instead of to each individual person that elects them. At the moment, the connection between personhood and religions has been severed. We need personhood was no longer dependent on divine relationship. Today, if a corporation could be given full personhood, human beings can be stripped of it. Our constitutional rights as persons is under attack. The state is currently trying to define stakeholders as persons. So who are the corporations or nonprofit? As persons who are corporations or nonprofit organizations. And that is in line with the New World Order, the World Economic Forum. Corporations are objects, things with no rights. We need to recognize human beings as persons that have divine relationship to God so that the fetus can be restored to personhood. Otherwise, the state will continue to revoke a fetus constitutional right and continue viewing it as an object that can be destroyed by abortion. Persons are not objects the state can revoke without warrant or warning, even arbitrarily forbid it from developing into a full human person. We need to restore personhood by getting the church to protest loudly and vigorously about this attempt by Colorado to define corporations as stakeholders worthy of divinity. It is absurd that corporations and nonprofits are treated as more superior than human beings. And today, I'm going to ask you that you please sign up and donate for my initiative and help me promote it in Colorado, because it will put parents back in the driver's seat for educating their kids. I need your help, and I'm asking you to please click the donate button and help me raise awareness to what's going on in our state and bring back the power of parents to raise and train their kids in the way they should go. If we put parents back into the equation, mental health illness will decrease. gun violence will be less. If we continue usurping our constitutional rights, we will see more and more erosions of our personal freedom. Thank you very much, and I hope and pray that you stand with me and you donate and sign up for my emails. Thank you very much.